Welcome to another episode of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. A progressive and populist insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining show on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people, and not just the elite few. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters from his mid-Michigan attic, it's time for the award-winning Pat Johnston. It's all yours, Pat.
Yeah! Welcome to another installment of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I am Pat Johnston, and is it really a surprise to any of you that less and less people are describing themselves as Republicans nowadays? Not to me. ABC News reports that the share of Americans saying they are Republicans or Republican-leaning independents in the first quarter of 2026 is at 39%. That's the lowest dating back to 2015. I mean, come on. That's not really hard to understand because the MAGA Republican Party is in reality nothing but an arm for the Trump regime, which inflicts harm on the working class in order to enrich and cover up the crime-ridden and corrupt Epstein class. I mean, just listen to Secretary of State Marco Rubio the other day on Fox News.
This is a country that has trouble coming up with drinking water. This is a country whose economy is in shambles. It's going to be even worse off after this operation. This is a country whose people have been protesting in the streets because not just the lack of freedom, but the lack of economic opportunity, because they've taken all of their money. All the money they have, the little money they have because of sanctions, and they've invested all of it in sponsoring terrorism, in building long-range missiles, increasing the range of their missiles every year.
Wow, I can't believe Marco gave America such a blunt yet correct assessment of how the working class is feeling in America. I just can't believe that. I've got to believe dear leader Trump is going to be very, very angry with little Marco. Oh, wait, hold on. Yes. Oh, okay. I'm now being told that was Rubio talking about Iran. But was he? We've got water around the United States that contains PFAS in many areas. We've got less and less investments in the working class, so that way we can build more and more weapons. I mean, dear leader is proposing $1.5 trillion in defense spending. $1.5 trillion from the no wars guy. And here we go again, 1 month into the Iran war, and we have zero idea what the hell we're doing there. We spent around $39 billion thus far, while the Trump regime gives us 19 different reasons as to why we're supposedly fighting this war. I mean, hell, they can't even decide whether or not we are in a war or not. Meanwhile, the Urban Institute recently released a study showing how at least 171,000 Michiganders will lose Medicaid coverage thanks to the MAGA Republicans' so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which I always call on this show the MAGA murder budget, since that budget will lead to the deaths of some Americans. And that report says the number could balloon from 171,000 Michiganders to lose their Medicaid coverage to 355,000 if nothing is done. Thanks a lot, MAGA Michigan Republican congresspeople like Elissa Backcrap Crazy McLean, the Human Pylon John Molnar, Tim Walberg, Louisiana Jack Bergman, Tom I'm Afraid of Chalk Barrett, Bill Huizenga, and John James. Ah, yes, that John James, who's running for governor, but you wouldn't know it because he's basically running his campaign in his bunker. I mean, isn't that what they used to say about Joe Biden? However, I guess John James knows the less he says and the less that he appears in public, the better. But it's no different than his time in Congress, as he's missed more roll call votes than any other MAGA Michigan Republican in Congress. The Detroit News' Melissa Nan Burke reports that John James missed 10% of his votes last year. Wait, whoa, hold the phone here, hold the phone. Do we need to install some work requirements in order for MAGA Republicans to collect their cushy congressional benefits? I mean, come on, John James isn't showing up for work. Is he just downstairs playing on his Xbox? Do we need work requirements to ensure that MAGA Republicans are not fleecing the American taxpayer? I think we should. Now, a spokesperson for John James responded to that Detroit News story saying, in 2025, he was one of just two in the delegation to have his own bill signed into law by President Trump, halting harmful EV regulations and protecting Michigan's auto industry. Whoa, wait a second. John James championed a bill blocking California from passing a ban on gas-powered cars? That's the bill that dear leader would later sign into law. That's the bill Michigan's so-called alpha moderate Elissa Slotkin voted in favor of in the U.S. Senate. In fact, Elissa Slotkin was the only Democratic senator to vote for that bill. And with gas prices on the rise, thanks to Trump's and Israel's right-wing government's war in Iran, it sure would be nice nowadays if we would have continued pressing on with EV cars, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? Check out my 10-minute take, by the way, on the whole myth being perpetrated out there by corporate and establishment Democrats on how Elissa Slotkin's so-called moderation is why she would eventually go on to defeat Florida Mike Rogers in 2024. It is such a lazy take, considering Slotkin had a 2 to 5% lead heading into the final weeks of the election, only to win it by 0.3%. And I argue is because of her lack of direction and her so-called moderation that such a loser of a candidate like Mike Rogers got so close to upsetting her. You can find that video on Left of Lansing's Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Left of Lansing. Sign up by becoming a member for free. It doesn't cost anything to become a member, because you'll notice that I post other content on there that is not available on the podcast. So sign up on patreon.com/Left of Lansing. You can also email me, leftoflansing@gmail.com as well. Now, I did post another video over the weekend on the Left of Lansing Patreon page, and it was on that whole so-called controversy over progressive Democratic candidate for Michigan's other U.S. Senate seat, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, who is appearing with Hasan Piker, who's one of the more popular national progressive podcasters and who's got a large younger audience. Now, the main objection by some establishment corporate Democrats to Piker is that he's been against Israel's right-wing government's genocide in Gaza, and he's also been against the Iran war, and he's also been for the working class. Now, Dr. Abdul's primary opponents, State Senator Mallory McMorrow and Congresswoman and Miss AIPAC herself, Haley Stevens, attacked Abdul for appearing with Hasan next week at stops at MSU and U of M. Of course, Florida Mike Rogers attacked him as well, which means those Democrats attacking Dr. Abdul are on the same side as Florida Mike Rogers. Is that the side you really want to be on, everyone? And Senator Elissa Slotkin, the alpha senator, was also critical of Dr. Abdul, even though she would go on Bill Maher's show later on in the week, which is strange because Bill Maher is a blatant Islamophobe, but it just proves to me it's okay in political circles and the Epstein class circles. It's okay to be Islamophobic. But you can't be against the right-wing genocidal Israeli government. But Dr. Abdul is bringing aboard a well-known podcaster who has a record of reaching younger voters. I mean, that makes complete sense. If you have a popular podcaster who reaches younger voters, you'll bring him along whenever you are going to be appearing at college campuses. Reaching Gen Z, especially Gen Z male voters, is a problem, right, for Democrats? That's all I heard after the election. Well, this seems like a pretty good move by Dr. Abdul, don't you think? But what these establishment corporate pro-Israel Democrats and consultants fail to understand is how people like Dr. Abdul are actually trying to get Democrats back to their roots when they used to represent the working class. Remember those days? Now, actually, many of you don't, but they used to do that. And how best to do that? Well, maybe through the way that Dr. Abdul's doing it, through a populist, progressive, democratic, socialist, working class agenda. Medicare for all, for instance, is not scary since poll after poll after poll shows it getting ringing endorsements from a majority of the American people. And with college costs skyrocketing, energy costs skyrocketing, the Michigan Public Service Commission, again, by the way, just granted consumers energy with another lovely rate hike. So thanks again there, guys. With groceries and gas prices skyrocketing, healthcare getting slashed, and yet even more unaffordable, you can understand why socialism continues to gain more and more support from Americans. You see, the working class sees their leaders making it their number one goal to protect and work on behalf of the rich, elite, and untouchable Epstein class. Now remember, last November, an Axios Generation Lab poll of college students across the country revealed that 67% of them said that they held a positive or neutral association with the word socialism, compared with just 40% with the word capitalism. And that doesn't surprise me one bit. And as a democratic socialist like Bernie, AOC, Memdani, and Detroit City Council people Denzel McCampbell and Gabriela Santiago Romero, I can understand wholeheartedly why socialism is gaining in popularity while the current corrupt Epstein class system of capitalism is failing. As I reported during my Monday musing, I saw around 850 people attend the Mount Pleasant No Kings event, which was organized by Central Michigan Indivisible. And like Leaf Colt from Traverse Indivisible reported last week, Indivisible Central Michigan is also gaining members and in popularity. I remember when they held an event that I covered here on Left of Lansing in March of last year in downtown Mount Pleasant, as they were highlighting how proposed cuts to Medicaid and SNAP benefits would devastate thousands of mid-Michiganders. That event was held on a weekday afternoon and received a nice attendance at the time of what I'd say 30 to 40 people. Fast forward to last weekend, where 850 people attended that No Kings rally. Yeah, I'd say the working class is energized, and it's a working class that isn't waiting around for someone to lead the way. No, they're making noise. They are the ones who are forcing change themselves. And they're making demands such as focusing on the working class, focusing on Medicare for all, abolishing ICE, impeaching dear leader, and ending Trump's and the right-wing Israeli government's war on Iran. And like I said in my Monday musing, I was also inspired to see more younger people attend that No Kings protest in Mount Pleasant too. What did not inspire me is that yours truly apparently doesn't know how to operate his recording device, and so a few interviews I thought I conducted with those in the crowd did not record. However, I did record some sounds at the No Kings protest in Alma, which is about 17 miles south of Mount Pleasant. That protest was put together by the Gratiot Democratic Party, and I got to catch up with Christy Freestone, who is the chair of the Gratiot County Democratic Party, as the No Kings protest was wrapping up. So here you go. How do you feel about everything here today?
I feel great. I think we've had a really good turnout for Alma. We're not quite sure how many we've had here today, but we think it's around 130. We've had people that left and other people that came, so I'm guessing it's about 150 that came today. So
and a lot of people honking, too.
That's right. And lots of horn honking, right. No, we're really excited. We have Ben Ambrose, who's running against John Molinar as a Democrat for our House of Representatives seat, is here today, and he's going to meet with everyone in the office when our march ends here today. He's a candidate that we are sure can beat Molinar.
Yeah, that is great. And we could really use that,
That's
too.
Right. We have to take over the House and Senate, or we're in trouble in this democracy.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
What do you think was bringing people out here today? Why do you think they decided, hey, you know what, on Saturday afternoon, I want to come on out and let my voice be heard?
Well, I think it's because it was so publicized nationally, and I think everybody wanted to be a part of that. I know that we've had people calling in, wanted to know the times, they wanted to be a part of this. And it was cold today. It was wind chill was like 25 degrees or something, but we still had a really, really good turnout. We've got lots of Alma College students came today.
Oh, good.
I think people have had it with Donald Trump and his administration and the war in Iran and the Epstein files and all the corruption. We finally had it. I think if it's going to happen, it's happening from the people rising up. It's not happening from the top down.
Right.
It's got to happen from the bottom up.
Well, and that's what I'm kind of realizing, too. This seems like it's just really more people power than anything. And they're not going to, the working class is kind of tired and they are not going to wait around.
Yeah, I have some friends that are visiting from Ohio. They came last night. And they said the gas prices along the way are close to $5 a gallon.
Wow.
This week in Alma, they were $4.18 a gallon at the beginning of the week. I went to the grocery store last night and got one of the little carts and just filled it with a few things, and it was $300 prices are just out of control. If we weren't spending $1 billion a day on a war in Iran, we could feed all the children in this country. Everyone's health care would be taken care of, and we have no input in that. That's why we have to get out and vote these people out in the next election.
Hey, thanks again to Christy Freestone, chair of the Gratiot Democratic Party, for taking a brief time out of her busy time there at the Alma No Kings protest. And you could hear from my interview there that there were many cars honking as they drove by, too. You can tell that people are engaged. The working class is paying attention. Again, you heard Christy talk about how the Trump regime is screwing over the working class, but you also heard Christy have some demands on how to help the working class over the Epstein class. And you also heard Ms. Freestone talk about Democratic U.S. House candidate Ben Ambrose, who talked with the crowd after the event. Now, he's trying to face off against the aforementioned MAGA Republican Congressman and human pylon, John Molinar. And in fact, I have to say this too. I saw several anti-John Molinar signs in both Mount Pleasant and in Alma. So that tells me again that the working class is also in tune with who is helping aid and abet the Trump regime's fascism. Now, here's just a snippet of House candidate Ben Ambrose from that No Kings event. Listen.
Trust is by far the most important thing. How many of us here trust politicians? That's what I thought. That's something we have to change. That is a branding that we have to change. And the only way we're going to do that and create trust in our politicians is by being transparent. And it's by showing where the money comes from, what we do with the money. It's by reaching out and talking to people and doing what we say we're going to do. That's where we start rebuilding this trust that's been eroded. And that absolutely needs to happen.
It's pretty good. Ben Ambrose said he'd love to be on the show later on this month, so I'm looking forward to that. Now, I did share some pics from the Mount Pleasant No Kings rally on my socials, and I got a lot of response from them as well. So thanks again, everybody out there. I just wanted also for you, I just wanted to document how Mid-Michigan, even though it's in MAGA country, isn't happy with the direction of their country either. I was amazed at how many cars honked as they drove by the protesters at both places. I also noticed on my socials how thousands of protesters appeared in Traverse City, which was organized by Traverse Indivisible and other Indivisible chapters. In fact, I saw a sign at that event that read, "I love America, that's why I'm here." It's one of my favorite signs. Although my dad attended the No Kings protest and march in Ann Arbor, and he sent me a picture of a sign which read, "What kind of a world are we leaving behind for Keith Richards?" Now that was funny. That was funny. I also had some good friends attend the No Kings rally in Lansing, where they were part of the 2,000 who attended there. So good turnouts happened everywhere. But the question remains, what will the working class do with this energy? Because it seems to me, judging from the protest I attended and seeing the other protests across Michigan and the nation, the working class has demands, such as abolishing ICE, ending the Iran war, ending money going to Israel's right-wing genocidal government, and reinvesting once again in the working class. Some of these demands are demands that many corporate establishment milquetoast third-way Democrats frankly don't want to acknowledge. They don't want to meet those demands, not one bit. But there are many working-class populist candidates in Michigan who are finished with doing the moderate thing, which is AKA the corporate thing. As the working class was left behind, the Democratic Party wasn't anywhere to be found, as the party decided some 35 years ago to become a more corporate-friendly party, like the MAGA Republican Party. And that's why areas of Michigan, such as the Upper Peninsula and the lower northern part of the Mitten, turned red after being blue when, I was growing up many, many years ago. Democrats abandoned those areas. Democrats abandoned their working class roots and their working class messages. And those who decide to run are told to run a safe, moderate campaign in those areas, where nothing bold to discern themselves from the MAGA Republican candidate is ever stated, and so they end up losing, and losing big. There's no working class vision being shared because a working class vision is desperately needed if Democrats plan on actually winning elections in red areas again. Take Kyle Blomquist, who's a progressive Democrat running for the 1st Congressional District seat in the UP and the northern parts of the LP. This is a seat that is currently being held by Louisiana Jack Bergman, who's too afraid to appear at any town halls in his district, which is just funny, isn't it? It seems like a common theme amongst these alpha MAGA Republicans. They're just too afraid to talk to their constituents. I wonder why. Is it because their policies are hurting their constituents? Not to tell you, it's nice to finally have some bold, alpha energy Democrats who press a bold, working class agenda while pushing back against the rich, elite, and untouchable Epstein class. Kyle Blomquist will join me here in a moment to talk more about his campaign and why his campaign is resonating with the many in his district, which has, again, turned MAGA red over the last decade. You're listening to LOL.
You're listening to Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. Left of Lansing is now on Patreon. You can check out a complete archive of the show and other stellar content Pat doesn't share on the show. Visit patreon.com/leftoflansing. Become a member for free. But we won't be upset if you drop off a $5 donation when you visit. At the very least, it will help Pat pick up the bill the next time we meet up for lunch. I think I deserve it. And now you deserve more Left of Lansing.
Hey, by the way, thanks again for all of the likes on my socials after I shared all those pictures from the No Kings protest in both Alma and Mount Pleasant last weekend. Glad to know that you like them. And also, thanks for stopping by and becoming a member on patreon.com/leftoflansing. Okay, I am more than fired up to talk with this week's guest. Kyle Blomquist is a progressive candidate for Michigan's 1st Congressional District, which encompasses the entire Upper Peninsula, as well as a good chunk of the northern Lower Peninsula. And of course, that's the current home of Louisiana Jack Bergman, yes, the MAGA Republican congressman who's just a rubber stamp for the Trump regime's coddling of the rich and lawless Epstein class, while also spending a decent amount of time never really living in Michigan, as we've talked about here a few times. Now, Kyle's also on the Iron Mountain City Council, which to me just shows that he's quite involved and really cares about his community and local government. Kyle Blomquist, thanks a lot for stopping by to talk with us here on Michigan's premier progressive podcast.
Oh, hell yeah. Thank you for having me.
Hey, I'm guessing when you decided to run for Congress, sleep was one aspect of your life that you knew you'd have to sacrifice, because it seems like to me you are just about everywhere nowadays. How has the campaign been going thus far?
It's been spectacular. It really has been. And, it's funny that you mentioned sleep, because I'm still, I'm at the office. I'm an architect full-time still. So I'm doing 2 full-time jobs right now. So usually I wake up at 2 a.m. I do my day job, and then I switch over to campaigning, and really has been excellent. It's a massive district, as you mentioned, but the number of people that we've gotten to speak with and the breadth of people in terms of their political leaning has been really astounding. And I have a lot to thank for the Indivisible chapters who have been putting on these candidate forums, which have given us access to our constituents of all shapes, right?
Yeah, that's right. I talked with Leif Colt from Traverse Indivisible last week, and he brought up those candidate forums that the Traverse groups have been holding up there, and I think that's terrific as well. Hey, Kyle, before we move on, I was wondering, what kind of architect work?
We're a general practitioner. We're up in Iron Mountain, Michigan. We're halfway between some of it and the rest of it here in the UP, and so you don't say no to anything. So we'll do everything from, someone's small residential addition all the way up to tens of millions of dollars, school renovation projects or office buildings. So it's a little bit of everything.
Gotcha. And Iron Mountain, just for those who may not be completely aware, that's on the west side of the UP, correct?
It's around the center of the UP. It's right along the Wisconsin border.
Oh, okay, right around there. Oh, well, great. So that way you could pick me up some Spotted Cow beer. You can just go right over.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go down to the Quick Trip and we'll get you some.
Okay, awesome. Well, look, I know that you left the UP. I read some of your bio that you left the UP to get your degree in architecture, but did you always know that you would return to your home and that, that was always going to be your home?
I don't think anybody knows for certain. I think that the possibilities when we, my wife and I, we met in architecture school and we've been working together ever since. Her and I now own the practice here in Iron Mountain and work together every single day. Her desk is about 6 feet away from mine. But, when we graduated with our master's degree from Milwaukee there, things were really touch and go there for a bit. I mean, it was 2012. The economy was absolutely, crap, and you never know for certain. But I've always had a great love for where I grew up in the Upper Peninsula in general and Northern Michigan in general. And one beautiful thing about, campaigning in a district like ours is I'm hitting places of both the Upper Peninsula and the Lower Peninsula that I've never been to before. And it's been a tremendous blessing to just be able to see these places that are, simultaneously very familiar because there's a sameness to it all, but it's just utterly beautiful everywhere you go on every coast.
I hate always admitting this, but for some reason, I went to the Pacific Ocean, to the Atlantic Ocean in my lifetime before I ever visited the UP. I'm originally from Redford Township, the Detroit area.
Oh, sure.
And so I got up there a few years ago, and I still am upset at myself that it took me so long because it is great country up there. And, speaking of that, my whole family, they're from Western Pennsylvania. Okay. Which is old steel and coal country out there. And despite the region, facing a population loss there, job loss, massive job loss, experiencing the opioid crisis and homelessness and feeling essentially just forgotten. Outside of Pittsburgh, that area, Kyle, is very, very pro-Trump. And I know that by seeing the signs in the yards when I'm driving through the area, and also see Trump signs on business fronts. And I wonder, what's the best way, do you feel, to connect with voters who turn to Trump as someone they thought that could save them when, really he's leaving them hung out to dry? Because I get the same feeling in parts of northern Michigan when I drive around there, too, because I saw a lot of Trump signs when I was driving there, too, about a year ago. Is it because,
Democrats like Chuck Schumer, for instance, said that Democrats should only focus on suburban voters. He said that about 6 years ago and forget about rural voters. I mean, maybe it's just not that simple, but does it paint a problem as to why Democrats have struggled to connect with some working class voters there?
I think you hit it on the head there. I think that when I see places go deeply red or deeply Trump specifically, is I see that as a specific failing of the Democratic Party. Is if the Democratic Party is to live up to its working class bona fides and its history, then we need to re-embrace that. And a big part of that is rejecting billionaire and corporate money as you're going through your campaign. And that seems to be something that the Democratic Party does not want to do. I think that what I've seen specifically in the places where I've lived, especially here in the Upper Peninsula, is that people are upset. People are angry justifiably with the system. And you have one person in Donald Trump coming out and saying, you're right to be angry, and here's who to be angry with. You should be angry at immigrants, or you should be angry at trans kids in high school sports, or any number of these other bullshit, right? But you're at least acknowledging pain, where I think that the Democratic Party has gone away from acknowledging pain, and they do this go along to get along kind of strategy. And what they've really done is they've removed the stakes from a lot of elections, especially in places like the Upper Peninsula and Northern Michigan, by not proposing to do things that are going to meaningfully, drastically improve people's lives. And they usually try to have the distance between them and the Republican position on any number of things, thinking that moderating to a point of obscurity and then attacking your opponent on strictly partisan grounds is going to win in places like this. People are starving for change one way or the other. And that if you do not give them reform, they will take the next best thing, which I think is retribution for a lot of people. And I understand this because most of my friends in Iron Mountain are Republicans to this day. And we still get along famously because we don't look at each other in partisan terms. That's a wedge that somebody else introduces to relationships, that ultimately we're all working the same jobs. We're all having the same affordability crises. We're still seeing our rural healthcare systems crumbling. We're still having the same housing affordability problems. You can talk to somebody for 45 minutes and be in utter agreement until one person says, yeah, but those Democrats, or yeah, but those Republicans. And so my approach is really to acknowledge that if you sell some of your finite time on this earth for $1, and if you ever stop, the system either abuses you or forgets you, then congratulations, you're in the American working class and you're one of the 90% in this country. And the sooner that we start to recognize that solidarity with one another, then the sooner we're going to start to actually gain the sort of power that we deserve and the kind of change that we need.
Yeah, I talked with some other progressives in the UP here in the last couple of years on the show. I think one of them was former state Senate candidate. Her name is Christina Reynolds. I also have talked with Delta County board member and state Senate candidate right now, Kelly Van Ginhoven. And, I've heard some similar sentiments that for a good many years, you just didn't really have much of a Democratic presence up there in the UP. And maybe that area was forgotten by the Democratic Party, which is astounding to believe, because I remember growing up, especially when I was a college student in the 1990s. I mean, that was Bart Stupek country. I mean, that was always kind of at least a bluish kind of area, right?
Yeah, and that's to say that it could be blue again. I think that it is. I would contend that there's about 100 congressional districts in this country where the Democratic Party has thrown up their hands. They said, we're not even going to compete. We're not going to participate in those districts. And I think that shows both in terms of the kind of resources that our areas get, but also it shows on the faces of my neighbors who can acknowledge that one party pays them mind and the other one doesn't.
I heard your interview last week on the podcast called For Sake of the Argument with Lori Goldman, and it's a production from our good friends here from the Distill Social, and I will make sure to provide a link so everybody can hear that interview as well. But in that interview, I think you said something to the fact that you have never really been, or you weren't a Democrat, or maybe that you were more independent. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. So when I was growing up in the Upper Peninsula, when I graduated from high school, it was 2004. And all my friends were Republicans. Most of the people around me were Republicans. It was a rural red county. It was post 9/11. There's this patriotic fervor. And when I left to college, I was a Republican. That was an inherited partisan identity. And that's where most people start, is they've inherited a partisan identity. Right. And as I went off to school and I started to expand my horizons, I was able to start to break free. I started to recognize that there was any number of these things that I don't actually believe. And all I was left with was ultimately what I started with, is that I have this flimsy name tag that says Republican on it. And as soon as I discarded that and I started to evaluate my beliefs, I realized that the people standing to my right were not the Republican mainstream. For the most part, they were the Democratic Party mainstream. And what that did was it fostered in me a great distrust of the two-party system and the way that it's used as a wedge to divide the American working class. And so I wasn't running to pick up like a Democratic Party moniker. I identify like most Americans identify, as independents who happen to vote alongside one party or the other, usually based on some kind of defensive posture. But I want to give my neighbors something to vote for, not against. And I think that that's something that's been lacking, especially in areas like ours.
Yeah, exactly. I like how you put that.
You want people to vote for something. And I always feel like in today's politics, and you mentioned it already about this whole idea of always having to moderate. I always feel like when that happens, then a certain candidate who wants to portray themselves as a moderate is saying, well, don't vote for that guy.
But they're not exactly telling you why you should vote for them.
Well, and I would go further. I think that what you do in that regard is that you capitulate to the framing. You say, they're right about everything, and I'm going to be a partial measure. I'm going to do just to the left of whatever their position is on immigration or hawkish foreign policy. And that, one, it completely disengages your own base of support, but also it doesn't drive anybody over. If somebody wants that kind of policy, they have that kind of policy on the right. Where we're missing is the kind of policy that's going to like meaningfully reform people's material conditions.
Kyle, the Urban Institute, I saw this study recently where it says that around 171,000 Michiganders will lose Medicaid coverage thanks to the MAGA Republican so-called Big Beautiful Bill. And that report also says that that number could really balloon to around 335,000 if nothing is done whatsoever. Now, that alarming number coincides with how some 400 hospitals are in danger of closing thanks to that bill. And a recent study by the Center for Healthcare Quality and Payment Reform suggests that as many as 9 rural Michigan hospitals could be at risk for closure here in the near future. I mean, this is going to decimate both urban and rural communities. And I've got to imagine that some of these cuts are being felt in your district. And I imagine that you're getting to hear a lot of people telling you what it's like right now. It just seems like we as a country that we're doing the exact opposite of paying attention to the general welfare of our citizens. And I was wondering what you're hearing out there.
You're absolutely right. I think that what we're seeing really is a system that's been sagging under its own weight the entirety of my life. That I remember back in the 90s hearing about hospital systems either closing or reducing services, even, as a young buck where you're not really paying attention to that sort of stuff. It's something that we've almost come to expect here in the Upper Peninsula. And what we're doing is we're taking these nodes of care offline and we're doubling the distance between us and our care, or we're reducing the quality of our care. Ironwood just recently closed their labor and delivery department, not because people in the Upper Peninsula, the Western Upper Peninsula, don't need babies delivered, but because it wasn't profitable to the company that owned that healthcare system. And I think that that's a ridiculous state of the world. And I think what we need to confront when it comes to the Big Beautiful Bill is not only was it completely disingenuous in what it was attempting to do, but also even if you confront it on completely, if you take their argument at face value and say that what we've decided to do in the only developed nation in the world, the only wealthy country in the world that doesn't provide universal health care to all of its citizens, is we somehow found even more people that deserved less care. That we use the old welfare queens argument to manufacture this population of able-bodied 25-year-old guys that are living in their mother's basement playing Xbox, and they have the audacity of having health care. And so we decided that we're going to take a hammer to the whole system, a system that's barely standing up on its own 2 feet as it is. And we broke it. We broke it further when we need to do the opposite. We need to say everybody deserves care regardless. Everybody deserves care. I don't want to have haves and have-nots in a healthcare system. I believe that healthcare is a human right, and that's why I support Medicare for all.
Kyle, was Medicare for all always something that you believed in, or was it a gradual process where maybe you were a little skeptical at first, but as time went on, you said, no, really, this is the best way to care for people?
I was subject to the exact same propaganda throughout the course of my life as most people are. That tells us that, man, it costs too much, or, it's this extreme position. When you examine it from a global lens, the American position is massively radical. It is a system that is built on profit. It is a system where Americans pay twice what the rest of the developed world pays for their healthcare per capita, and we have worse outcomes. I look at my own healthcare situation here in the Upper Peninsula. Man, when you're in the Upper Peninsula, you're surrounded by 2 things. You're surrounded by Great Lakes and you're surrounded by that Wisconsin border, and that represents the end of your healthcare network. And so even though you have decent care that's not too far away, You can't get to it without doubling your family maximum out of pocket. And that's not a system that's built on making sure that me and my family are taken care of and that our needs are met. That's a system based on technicality and profit.
And I was going to ask you, what do you say to some voters up there who say, you know what, I understand the system is broken. We're feeling it. It's not working the way we want it to work. But, that whole Medicare for all stuff, that just sounds like socialism to me. And
Sure.
it's going to lead to less. Now, I always like that's going to lead to less care, as if that's not happening right now already. What is usually your pitch to those kinds of voters?
I'll say this is that those people exist. And I think whether they admit it or not, I think that they are gettable, that they're persuadable. I think you can talk to them about what the rest of the world enjoys. I think that even when they fall back on old arguments in terms of access or wait times or any of these other things, you say, hey, brother, if you can't afford care, your wait time is infinite, right?
Right.
If you are avoiding care because of the cost, or your health care claims are being denied by a private health insurance company, then you don't get care one way or the other. So the people who can afford care are always going to be at the front of the line. Worry about you, worry about your family. But one thing I'll say, and hopefully this is a point of hope, is that I believe that those walls are starting to come down, even with people who vote Republican. That even with people who vote Republican, they are starting to acknowledge the efficacy of a single payer system, that they're starting to recognize how far of an outlier America is relative to the rest of the world. And I don't think that that's a deal breaker anymore. And in fact, I think that if you are ever trying to get somebody off the schneid in terms of their partisan leaning or just being agnostic politically and disengaged, I think you need something like Medicare for All to tell them, we actually are earnest about trying to improve your lives and make sure first and foremost that you're taken care of. Like, you should have a decent quality of life, and the last thing you should be in is medical debt.
Another policy I want to make sure we focus on here that I know you're pushing is affordable housing. And, I saw something where how more than 700,000 Americans experienced some kind of homelessness last year. And that was like a jump of around, I think I read 18%. But Kyle, what I like about your campaign is not only are you diagnosing the problem, because everybody, I think, can do that. They can say, okay, yeah, we know that affordable housing is an issue and it's the Republicans' fault. But no, you offer a solution for it, because, it's one thing to say that housing is unaffordable, which we all agree on, and that we need more housing, which we all agree on. But without a solution, it's all talk. And
you actually do more than that.
Yeah, I think that there's a tendency, especially now, as Zoran Mamdani has made affordability on everybody's lips.
Yeah.
Because he was successful at not only acknowledging the pain that the American working class is experiencing, but prescribing solutions. I think that where the Democratic mainstream is failing, is that they have just used that as a term to basically say, eggs, am I right? Healthcare, am I right? Housing, am I right? And at some point, we need to actually confront the fact that we have commoditized so much of our society, that so much of our society is built on profitability. And I think that one of the core problems with our housing system is that we have allowed private equity to buy up so much of our single family residential stock that now people can't afford their homes. They're basically billionaires, and their hedge funds are out competing households for their homes within their own communities. That affects our livability on the ground. The other thing that I've seen for the majority of my professional career as an architect is the way that American housing policy prefers these public-private partnerships, which are neither efficient in terms of delivering affordable housing, but also that they are handicapped very well towards moneyed interests, that they are taking care of them first. And so much of what our government does is it's pushing rope. It is trying to juice the profitability of one industry or another so that we can entice a private company to provide the things we need. And I think that what we need to do is we need to have a reversal of so much housing policy and go back to building public housing rather than doing things like low-income housing tax credits, which for those that aren't familiar, will use taxpayer dollars to provide an incentive to private developers to build affordable housing. But that affordability does not meet the low end affordability criteria that public housing does. And that instead what it does is it really creates a situation where that housing stock, those low income capped units, both don't have the full affordability that public housing does, but also we're moving those into the hands of private equity companies. And so what I encourage people to do is, and I don't have enough time to get really into it, but there is a cliff that is approaching us that looks like exiting a lot of our affordable housing stock, exiting affordability because those private developers have met their requirements through a low-income housing tax credit program. And not only are we not going to be net gaining in terms of the number of affordable housing units on an annual basis, but we're actually going to plateau and then go in the reverse. And that something like a third of our current low-income housing stock is going to exit affordability in the next 10 years. At a time when we're in the middle of a housing crisis. So, I mean, like these are things that we absolutely need to address yesterday, and nobody's even talking about it now.
And you're right. I mean, if there's no solution to stopping private equity and what's damaging the housing market, then yeah, we're going to get to nowhere to start. So I agree with you there. We only have a couple moments here left. I saw that the aforementioned Congressman Louisiana Jack Bergman is, obviously I know a lot of people up there call him. We say that for those who are just listening because it appears, right, Kyle, that he doesn't really spend a whole lot of time in your district.
Yeah, he's like shows up unannounced and he disappears just as quick. I don't know much about his situation up here. Rumor has it it's a two-rut road out in Waters Meet. I can't speak to the truth beyond that, but I think that this is a person that has not done a town hall since 2017. And when you look at the video that's available of that town hall, I don't blame him because he took a beating. He's a cynical partisan plant that they juice with a lot of PAC money and they get him through just because he's got an R next to his name and because perhaps his military bona fides.
I saw that he didn't really take too kindly to some of your words about ICE needing to be abolished. And I think he said that those kinds of words were irresponsible rhetoric from radical politicians. So what's your response to someone like Jack Bergman when they say something like that?
I think that you need to look at, who Jack Bergman is and how he votes. He votes the way that Donald Trump wants him to vote. He votes for a national security state that is really just security theater post 9/11. I think that when you're talking about being fiscally conservative, as many Republicans purport to be, is you're looking at a system that when INS disbanded and was hastily reorganized into DHS and what we see as ICE and CBP to this day is the last year of INS, Immigration and Naturalization Services, that took place under the Department of Justice, it did so around $4 billion a year. And now we're talking about $75 billion a year for a private police force that is wielded by whoever's in the White House. And so whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, I think most of us can agree that you don't want somebody in the White House to be able to unilaterally, on a political basis, on a partisan basis, deploy effectively the 16th largest military in the world to any number of communities and wield that kind of power. And so Jack Bergman is completely off base, not only with the American electorate, but something like 20% of Republicans believe in that we could abolish ICE. And so that's not a radical position as far as I'm concerned, because my position is that we need to acknowledge that immigration has always been a strength in this country and that we need to move away from spending all of this money on this security theater that is it's an inversion of the facts when it comes to crime rates, when it comes to economic impact. And we need to just accept that we are a nation of immigrants. We were built by immigrants and that we should embrace immigration.
Exactly. And I've heard you talk about this in other interviews too, where, you actually will talk to a lot of voters in your district on the economic benefits that immigrants give to the area and also give to the state of Michigan.
To me, it's just we've built so much. You can draw this back to any number of things, but I'll specifically focus on our rampant militarization, the expansion of our military to almost $1 trillion, to something like ICE. And you look at it and you go, it's all based on a lie. It's all based on this hysterical belief that we are always under attack and that everything is a national security concern. Mm-hmm. And that dominates our political discourse, when what we should be talking about is making sure that every American gets health care where they are without going into medical debt, without worrying about their claims being denied, that they can afford housing within their community, they earn a living wage, that they get paid time off, that we're not meant to just work all of the days of our lives, that leisure is a thing that we should be entitled to as human beings, and that we need to start addressing the material concerns of the American working class, because we're the people that make it all work. We're the ones that make it all run. And if we ever decide to, we can make it all stop. And I think we need to start positioning ourselves from that perspective, is that we are a grossly powerful entity in the American working class. And as soon as we stop thinking of our neighbors as Republicans or Democrats and start looking at them as allies in a fight for all the things that we all deserve, I think that we're going to get a hell of a lot better outcomes.
Yeah, right. No, I agree. And that's a great point. And I just want to mention this, too, since we're talking about national security here, Kyle, that I noticed a new poll that was just released, and I caught it just before you and I started this interview. It was a poll from YouGov showing nearly 60% of voters disapproving of Trump's war on Iran. So, to a guy like me, it would seem that yes man, such as Jack Bergman, those guys are really the radical ones, since they're the ones who support everything Trump and the Epstein donor class are doing when it comes to that war, and basically everything else.
Yeah, I think you can look at that in a number of ways. And I think what I would also encourage your listeners to look at is look at your Democratic Party candidates before a primary. Is if you can't come out and unequivocally, unambiguously come out against the war in Iran, come out against any funding to the war in Iran that would perpetuate that, if you can't say the simple things, that there's a genocide in Gaza, that we are funding the Israeli government as they perpetrate that genocide, as well as incursions into Lebanon and their role in starting this war with Iran. If you can't do that, if you can't breach that basic threshold of morality and just seeing with your eyes and hearing with your ears, then I would be very deeply suspicious of those people.
Is that why you decided to get into the race? Because you felt like the current Democratic field for this congressional seat were failing or coming up short in those areas?
Yes, absolutely. I was the third on the Democratic side to announce in this primary race, in Michigan's first. And it's because I didn't see my values reflected on either side of the ballot. And really, the two major things that I support more than anything in the world is I think that Medicare for all should be on every single ballot in this country until we have it, until we join the rest of the developed world in providing universal health care to all of our citizens, regardless of their age, income, working status, whatever. And that I saw my tax dollars used to bomb, starve, murder kids that look like my kids. It's a great moral injury to me and many in rural America to watch those things being perpetrated with your tax dollars and see such a divide between where the electorate is and where our government is on things like funding genocide in Gaza. And so when I see things like that, I could not allow an election cycle to pass without Medicare for all and ending genocide in Gaza and ending aid to Israel on those humanitarian grounds. I could not let an election cycle go by where my neighbors don't have that option on the ballot.
So I'm guessing no AIPAC donations for you, right?
No. I'm sure Jack's getting his AIPAC money pumped into him right now. No AIPAC money for me. I'm not accepting any corporate PAC money, nothing like that. If we need our representatives actually representing us, then we need to be able to send them there with our American taxpayer dollars. And that one way or the other, I would say this, is that I would pay attention to any of your candidates up and down the ballot, regardless of what district or where they are or which side of the ballot they're on, because if they're taking money from corporations and billionaires, then your individual donations is really just going to subsidize that corporation or that billionaire's investment in your politician. So I would be be judicious with the way that you would donate your small donations.
Kyle Blomquist, Progressive Democratic candidate for the 1st Congressional District. Hey, where can people learn more about you and donate to your campaign?
Hell yeah. Go to blomquistforcongress.com. That way you'll have a link to all of our social media. We keep up with all of them, but I would say that on a daily basis, if I need to shout something out, I'm doing so on Twitter. It's a hellscape, but it's one where we need to participate because that's where most people are. I would go to Blomquist for Congress. If you want to donate to our campaign, we are 100% grassroots, so every small donation matters. We've done a hell of a job here in March. We just breached, I think, 700 individual donations through Act Blue this month. And we're feeling really good about that. Number is nice and small in terms of the amount that everyone's contributing, because what that tells us is regular people are donating. And if you have time, if you're in the district or outside of the district and you want to go to our website and fill out a volunteer form, tell us what you'd like to do or what you're capable or comfortable doing, we will put you to work, whether it be knocking doors in the district or phone banking for us down the stretch, because it's a big, big district. I can't be everywhere at once. I need people who are evangelizing a message that is not partisan, that is able to talk to their neighbors once again and grow that kind of class solidarity that really is at the heart of this movement.
All right. We'll continue to highlight your campaign here on the show, and I'll make sure to include your campaign site and your socials wherever people are listening to. So,
thank you so much.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for being a strong progressive working class voice. And Kyle, just keep taking it to them, okay?
Hell yeah, brother. Thanks a lot.
Bringing progressivism with passion each and every week. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. Follow us on Blue Sky, Twitter, Facebook, and the Gram. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts, and subscribe to us on YouTube. We'd also like to thank Audio Boom for publishing the show and helping us spread our populist, progressive, and patriotic message. Speaking of which, let's get back to the show with Pat.
Hey, thanks again to Kyle Blomquist for talking with us here this week. And what a breath of fresh air Kyle is bringing to northern Michigan. I'll share his campaign site and his socials wherever you're listening to the show. Okay, last week's LOL weekly poll had you voting on who you'd support in the Michigan Democratic Senate primary race. You could vote on Twitter, YouTube, or on the Left of Lansing Patreon page. And taken together, here was the final tally. Dr. Abdul El-Sayed led the way with 52 points. Mallory McMorrow came in second place at 46%, and Haley Stevens collected 2%. So I guess it's safe to say that Haley Stevens doesn't really have much love on this show, or at least with many working-class Michiganders. Thanks to all who voted on the poll. Now, this week's weekly LOL poll is: the Trump regime is trying to restrict mail-in balloting by putting his Homeland Security in charge of the balloting. So the question is, should Trump's federal government restrict mail-in ballots and be in charge of mail-in ballots? Again, vote on my Twitter page, YouTube page, or on Left of Lansing's Patreon. And the answers, of course, will be yes and no. Time now for the Left of Lansing Last Call. Well, you remember when I played that clip earlier in the show when the Trump regime's little Secretary of State Marco Rubio criticized Iran for spending its money on building up its military and sponsoring terrorism rather than building up its working class? And the irony was thick because if you didn't know better, it certainly sounded like Marco was talking about the United States. Well, just one day after Marco made that statement, Dear Leader Trump said the following, and I quote, "We can't take care of daycare. We're a big country. We're fighting wars. It's not possible for us to take care of daycare, Medicaid, Medicare, and all those things." So he's verifying everything we progressives have always said. There's always money for war and for the Epstein class's toys and tax cuts, but there's never enough money for the working class. And I just love how 24 hours after Marco Rubio's statement there, Donald Trump says, hey, we're just like Iran too. Case in point, this week, another MAGA Michigan Republican in the state legislature was caught lying once again about the popular and successful RX Kids program. MAGA Republican State Senator Ann Bolin claimed that the RX Kids program, which is a prenatal and infant direct cash support program, is going to parents who will then use that money to get abortions. What? Well, thanks to our good friends from Distill Social, they got the audio of that meeting, and they posted Ann Bolin's remarks via audio, and you can hear it for yourself.
We did take a bit of a hit. One of them was the RX Kids, which is no guardrails, welfare for pregnant women, and in the first year of a child's life, they get a $1,000 a month. No income requirements, no guardrails, don't even know how long they've lived in Michigan. You just say, hey, I'm signing up for this, I'm so-and-so, and I'm pregnant, and then they can abort that baby. So they could collect, months of this and then abort their baby, and they've got that money. Or they get it for the first couple of months. There are no guardrails.
Just remarkable how much disdain MAGA Republicans have for working class families. Now, as Michigan Advance's Catherine Daly notes, there is no evidence of expecting mothers in Michigan's RX Kids program using that money to get abortions. In fact, there is one requirement, actually, to be eligible for the program. and that is that a mom must be at least 16 weeks pregnant. Studies and statistics show that 96% of abortions happen in the first 15 weeks. Now, this Trump-like, they're eating cats and dogs, and I never knew what Jeffrey Epstein was doing lie is nothing new from MAGA Michigan Republicans when it comes to RX kids. As I covered on here before, MAGA man-baby and Speaker of the House Matt Hall recently claimed that illegal immigrants were getting the money, without, of course, supplying any kind of evidence. But here's the thing, if you're a pro-life party, what difference does it make? Anyways, Ann Bolin, who is the House Appropriations Committee Chair, and Matt Hall blocked some $18 million meant to go towards RX kids when they blocked millions of dollars in work project funding that had already been passed. However, Ann and Matt didn't block any already approved corporate welfare money. Interesting how that always seems to work out, isn't it? Now, RX Kids started in Flint and is growing now in other communities across the state in both urban and rural areas, including Detroit and the UP. And early studies show that the cash payments are going towards baby supplies, food, rent, or housing expenses and utilities. And a lot of that money, by the way, is being spent at local businesses. A win-win for everyone. But here is the best part that I'm sure has got Ann Bolin and Matt Hall all twisted in knots. The right-wing think tank here in Michigan, known as the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, applauded RX Kids because it gives parents immediate power to spend the money by removing bureaucratic middlemen. And I would agree. It's one of the few times I agree with the Mackinac Center. But guess what? That doesn't matter to MAGA Republicans since their priority is uplifting the poor and disadvantaged billionaire Epstein class while punishing and punishing and punishing the working class. Oh, and their kids.
You're listening to Left of Lansing. Music for the show and everything else on Left of Lansing is provided by Wanderbeats. To hear the latest project and complete music archives, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site or subscribe to Space Leopard on YouTube. Now, back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of The Left of Lansing. I still cannot believe that dear leader Trump said we can't pay for Medicare, Medicaid, and daycare because we have to pay for Trump's and the right-wing Israeli government's war on Iran. Well, I'll give him this. It's one of the few times he's really being honest about America's priorities, right? Thanks again to Kyle Blomquist, candidate for the 1st Congressional District, for being on the show this week. And remember, you can always contact me via email, leftoflansing@gmail.com, or follow me on my socials, where I also enjoy engaging with you there. And remember, you can sign up for free on the Left of Lansing Patreon page, where you'll get every episode of the show, including videos and screeds of mine that you don't get on the show. All right, I'm heading down to the D on Friday for opening day with my dad and some good friends, and I think they're saying it's supposed to be in the 70s that day. That's going to be crazy down there if the weather's that good. But hey, I think we deserve it, and I'm looking forward to it. Until next time, remember, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan.
You've been listening to Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. Left of Lansing was produced by Pat Johnston, brainstormed by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and yes, hosted by Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. Thanks to our good friend Rich for website assistance, and thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. We thank Audio Boom for publishing the podcast every week. Visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to Michigan's premier progressive podcast, and we'll talk with you again next week.